Good afternoon, class. Good afternoon, Ms. Murphy. I'm first class Detwiler, joined by first class Thompson. We are taking the con argument, commercial fishing does not have a future. So our stance kind of begins with the bullet points that we have listed out here. The first one, despite more efficient fishing technologies, commercial fishermen are catching less fish. So taking like nets, improvements in vessels, fish finders, stuff like that. We have all of that and we're fishing more, but we're catching less fish. Another reason that commercial fishing doesn't have a future is because advances in fishing technologies exceed advances in fishery modeling. So fishery modeling, that's like the thing that NOAA uses when they look at fisheries and they monitor them and they use that information to set catch limits. We focus much more on fishing technologies than we do models, especially in undeveloped countries and developing countries. There are some other issues that affect commercial fishing, such as climate change, ocean acidification, which is a direct result of climate change. And then also just the fact that fishing is such an important industry. It's $1 billion economy. And then along with that, coastal regions depend on fisheries as a crucial source of protein in their diet. So it's really important. It's not something that we can just stop doing necessarily. It's one of those like environmental, ethical challenges.
All right, so our topic is largely dependent on the concept of overfishing. So first we want to just define our terms so we're all on the same page here. Overfishing is defined as the removal of a species of fish at a greater rate than that the species can replenish its population naturally. So it's this balance between harvest rate and MSY, which is maximum sustainable yield. An interesting statistic that we found is that 1/3 of wild fish are currently being overfished, and that's a pretty drastic statistic right there. From 1990 to 2017, sustainable fish stocks have decreased from 90% to 65.8%. And something that I thought was kind of a big one was who is responsible for a large part of fish capture. And we found that it was China, Indonesia, and Peru were the top three. And even if you just go on like Google News and search overfishing, every article listed is about China and how they have overfished their own waters and are now going into other countries' EEZs and overfishing their waters. So next we have an interesting graphic that was from the Food and Something organization. So it shows world capture fisheries and aquaculture production. The orange is actual capture, like from the ocean and from freshwater. And as you can see, it sort of equals out after 1994, but it peaks in 2018 at the very end. That's when the data stopped being collected. And then the big increase that continues on in the 2000s is aquaculture. And aquaculture is also a really big part of our issue. So I think a lot of people off the bat think aquaculture is a really positive thing because we're not depleting the ocean's resources. And that is one way to look at it, but also the amount of food and fish it requires to feed fish populations in aquaculture is a really big con and sort of cancels out the positives of aquaculture.
Next, I'm going to look at the impacts of climate change. So overfishing is probably the main concern when it comes to what threatens commercial fishing, but climate change is also a big factor, and it's something that's only expected to increase. So one thing we know about the ocean is it's a heat and a carbon sink. So that's good for us living on Earth because it keeps our planet temperate. We don't have lots of carbon in the atmosphere and it's not super hot. That's thanks to the ocean. But that doesn't come without a cost. So the ocean is warming due to climate change, and temp-sensitive organisms living near the equator that evolved to live near the equator because it's at that specific hot temperature. It's getting hotter there, and that's not good for them. And that's especially things like larvae, which are more sensitive, and your corals. So corals have zooxanthellae, which have a pretty mild like temperature limit, and they can't rebound very quickly. So what happens is they get too hot, then they just eject from the coral, and that's where you get like the mass coral bleaching. Another thing that happens with increased temperature is there's more primary productivity. So like algae is going to increase, And sounds like a good thing because that's more energy available. But think about like algae blooms and like ecosystems that aren't used to having that level of primary productivity. So what you see happen is like coral gets smothered with algae, and it causes a number of other impacts. As far as fisheries are concerned, fish will move poleward and deeper. So they're following those constant water temperatures, which are like going deeper and towards the poles. And if you think about like your EEZ, you're going to have fisheries that move outside of your EEZ. So in the U.S., cod fisheries are going to struggle as the cod fisheries move poleward and like deeper towards like the north, basically. Another thing that happens with more carbon dioxide in the ocean is it impacts the ocean chemistry. So there's the figure on the top right there that shows how carbon dioxide dissolved in the ocean is converted into carbonic acid, which increases the acidity of the ocean. And the problem with that is calcifying organisms struggle to create like their shell or the calcium that they need in their body. So like shellfish, that's like a big fishery that will suffer as our oceans become more acidic. So just going further into like our main stance here. So what I said about the U.S. and other developing countries is we're pretty good. We have NOAA that monitors our fisheries, and they use like really good stock assessments that take into consideration weight and age distribution, as well as research that they do on their own to assess like how our fisheries are doing. And that's really good. It's also really expensive, and developing countries aren't able to do it as well, which is a problem for like places like the South China Sea, where those fisheries are less regulated. But one piece of information that is publicly available is catch weight. So you can look at like the catch weight for different like fisheries every year, and you can look at that and see how it's changing over time. The only problem with that is it's largely underreported. So they think that it's estimated by a factor of like 1 to 5 or 2 to 5 in developing nations. And all the data that we have from that shows that catch weight is decreasing, and it's decreasing with an increase in fishing technology and efficiency. That's things like refrigerated vessels that can process fish out at sea so they stay out while they keep catching. We have like better techniques like long lining, purse seining, trawling. We're catching more fish, or we're more capable of catching fish, but we're actually catching less. And then you have like fish finders and electronic navigation systems. And there's also still the pressure from climate change.
So in a lot of our MES classes, we talk about kind of depressing issues that make the world seem like it's about to end. So something important that we can talk about is what can you personally do to make a difference for these big issues like overfishing and sustainable fishing. So some things that are aggravating the issue of overfishing on a societal level, something we didn't talk much about is bycatch. And I know we've all seen those pictures of sea turtles caught in nets and things like that. So in order to really reduce our bycatch, we're going to have to significantly increase the regulations on like trawling nets and fishing nets to reduce the bycatch. Another big one is just overall poor management of fisheries, because ultimately regulations of fisheries is what's going to keep overfishing from happening. On a personal level, the worst thing you can do that aggravates overfishing is just being ignorant and not knowing what you're eating, what type of fish you're eating, if it's caught sustainably, and just being unaware. So listening to this PowerPoint, it's a good start. So what can we do to aid sustainable fishing? On a societal level, we can create more marine protected areas. Only about 1.5% of our oceans are considered a protected area. And I know that there's a lot of goals out there to increase that percentage. On a personal level, to help this, you can join support organizations such as the World Wildlife Fund, Environmental Defense Fund, and many more. Another thing is buy local. Another is ask a restaurant if the fish is sustainable, and that might be kind of embarrassing or like cringy to do when you're out with a group of friends. But just asking if the fish is sustainable not only informs you on what you're eating, but also brings awareness to the restaurant, because if their customers are, putting pressure on them to serve sustainable fish, then that will positively impact the type of fish that they're buying and certifiably sustainable fish. So, is this issue relevant? Yes, the commercial industry is extremely relevant due to its impact on the economy. It's a billion-dollar industry, and it provides food for many coastal regions around the world. There's also many island nations that are basically entirely dependent on fish, whose without fish stocks, they would likely starve. The commercial fishing industry is also partially regulated by the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard conducts, as you all know, fishery patrols that enforce a lot of the NOAA catch limits. As Coast Guardsmen, we're all supposed to identify as stewards of the environment, and I think especially MES majors, we all do. So in order to ensure that future generations can benefit from seafood and eating fish, it's sort of our responsibility to ensure that the ocean maintains steady fish populations and to ensure that we set limits for ourselves to keep the ocean stocked. And here are our references. Thank you.